For 35 years, I held on to the conviction that wealth was the key to bringing joy to those I cherished most. Now, at 71, as I stood before the travel agency desk with my credit card quivering in my grasp, the truth hit me like a thunderbolt. Everything I had believed was utterly mistaken. The glossy cruise brochures, spread across the mahogany desk, showcased everything I had dreamed of giving my family: Mediterranean sunsets, elegant dining rooms, and spacious suites where 3 generations could create memories together. My daughter Linda had been talking about this cruise for months, her eyes lighting up whenever she described the ship's amenities and the ports we would visit. Her enthusiasm had been infectious, and I found myself eagerly planning what I thought would be our most precious family vacation. The travel agent, a pleasant woman in her 40s, had been patient as I asked detailed questions about cabin configurations and meal plans. I wanted everything to be perfect for Linda, her husband Mark, and my 2 teenage grandsons, Jason and Tyler. At my age, I had learned that time with family was more valuable than anything money could buy, and I was prepared to spend whatever it took to ensure we had 2 weeks of pure joy together. My monthly pension provided a comfortable life, but this cruise represented a significant investment. Nearly $8,000 for the family suite I had specifically requested. The agent had shown me pictures of the spacious accommodations, with a separate bedroom for Linda and Mark, a sitting area where the boys could relax, and a private balcony where we could all gather to watch the sunrise over the Mediterranean. I could already picture us there, sharing stories and laughter as the ship glided through crystal blue waters. The morning had started with such promise. Linda had called early, her voice bubbling with excitement as she confirmed our afternoon appointment to finalize the booking. She had spent the previous evening researching shore excursions and restaurant reservations, creating detailed itineraries that would maximize our time at each port. Her enthusiasm reminded me of the little girl who used to plan elaborate tea parties for her dolls, attention to detail and all. I had dressed carefully for our meeting, choosing my navy blazer and the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 40th anniversary. Even though he had been gone for 5 years now, I still felt his presence during important family moments. He would have loved this cruise, would have been the one suggesting we upgrade to the suite with the larger balcony. His absence made these family experiences even more precious to me. Linda arrived at the agency exactly on time, her professional appearance commanding attention as she strode through the glass doors. At 43, she had built an impressive career in marketing, her confidence evident in every gesture. Mark followed close behind, checking his phone with the focused intensity that seemed to characterize everything he did. The boys had stayed home, probably relieved to avoid what they would consider boring adult business. The agent welcomed us warmly, spreading out the cabin layouts and excursion options across her desk like a feast of possibilities. I watched Linda's face as she examined each detail, her expression shifting from excitement to something I couldn't quite identify. Mark leaned over her shoulder, pointing to specific amenities and making quiet comments that I couldn't hear from where I sat. The numbers on the booking form seemed reasonable, given the luxury we would be receiving. $8,000 represented careful saving, and some dipping into the emergency fund Robert and I had built together. But seeing my family happy felt worth any financial sacrifice. I had already imagined the photos we would take, the stories we would share for years to come, the way this trip would become part of our family legend. As the agent began processing the paperwork, Linda suddenly straightened in her chair. Her expression had transformed into something cold and calculating that I had never seen before. Mark's hand moved to her shoulder in what appeared to be a gesture of support, but something in their body language made my stomach begin to flutter with unease. The agent looked up expectantly, waiting for our final confirmation before processing the payment. The moment felt suspended in time, filled with possibility and hope, completely unaware that everything I believed about my place in my daughter's life was about to shatter into pieces too small to ever put back together. The woman sitting across from me bore little resemblance to the daughter I had raised through sleepless nights and teenage rebellion. Linda's transformation into this polished professional had happened gradually over the years. But sitting in that travel agency, I found myself wondering when my little girl had become this stranger who looked at me with such calculating eyes. My mind drifted back to the beginning, to the tiny apartment where Robert and I had brought Linda home from the hospital. We had been so young then, barely 22, with dreams bigger than our bank account and love strong enough to overcome any obstacle. Robert worked double shifts at the factory while I took in sewing to help make ends meet, both of us determined to give our daughter everything we had never had. Those early years had been filled with careful budgeting and creative solutions. When Linda wanted dance lessons, I gave up my weekly coffee with friends to afford the monthly fees. When she needed a dress for the school formal, I spent 3 weeks sewing sequins by hand, working late into the night after she had gone to sleep. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in her happiness, a way to show her how much she was loved and valued. The teenage years brought different challenges and different sacrifices. Linda's academic achievements required expensive tutoring sessions and college preparation courses. Robert and I canceled our planned vacation to Yellowstone, using the money instead to hire the best SAT prep instructor in town. We ate more macaroni and cheese dinners than I care to remember, but Linda's acceptance to the state university with a partial scholarship made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. College expenses stretched our resources even thinner. While other parents encouraged their children to take student loans, Robert and I were determined to graduate Linda debt-free. I took a second job at the local department store, working evenings and weekends to help cover her tuition and living expenses. Robert picked up overtime whenever it was available, coming home exhausted, but always asking about Linda's latest achievements. The pattern continued after graduation, when Linda decided she needed a master's degree to advance in her chosen field. By then, Robert's health was beginning to show signs of the stress that would eventually take him from us, but he insisted we continue supporting our daughter's education. We refinanced the house to help pay for her graduate program, adding years to our mortgage, but ensuring Linda could focus on her studies without financial worry. When Linda met Mark during her final semester, I had been thrilled to see her so happy. Mark came from a wealthy family and seemed to appreciate Linda's intelligence and ambition. Their wedding had been a beautiful affair, though Robert and I had struggled to pay for our portion of the expenses. We wanted Linda to have the perfect day, even if it meant dipping into our retirement savings more than we should have. The birth of Jason and Tyler had brought such joy to our lives. Robert and I had eagerly embraced our roles as grandparents, babysitting whenever Linda and Mark wanted to travel, helping with school pickups and homework supervision. When the boys needed expensive sports equipment or wanted to attend summer camps, we quietly contributed what we could, never wanting them to miss opportunities because of money. After Robert's death, my relationship with Linda had seemed to deepen. She called regularly, visited frequently, and included me in family decisions. I felt grateful for her attention and support during my darkest period of grief. Looking back now, I wondered if what I had interpreted as love and concern had actually been something else entirely. The inheritance from Robert's life insurance policy had provided some financial security, but also seemed to change something in Linda's attitude toward me. Her questions about my finances became more frequent and detailed. She expressed concern about my ability to manage money at my age, suggesting that perhaps she should have power of attorney to help protect me from potential scams or poor decisions. Her interest in my financial affairs had initially seemed caring, even touching. I appreciated having someone to discuss investment options and budget concerns. When she suggested I move my accounts to her bank for easier management, it seemed like a thoughtful way to simplify my finances. When she recommended I add her name to my accounts for emergency purposes, it felt like responsible planning for my aging years. Gradually, Linda's involvement in my finances had become more controlling. She questioned my spending on small luxuries, like books or flowers, suggesting I was being frivolous with money I might need for future medical expenses. Her concerns seemed reasonable, even wise, coming from someone with advanced education and professional experience in business matters. The cruise had represented my attempt to reclaim some joy and spontaneity in my relationship with my family. I wanted to create positive memories, to show Linda and the boys that their grandmother could still contribute something meaningful to their lives. The idea of surprising them with this generous gift had filled me with excitement for weeks. Standing in that travel agency, watching Linda's expression harden into something unrecognizable, I began to understand that my decades of sacrifice had created something I never intended. Instead of gratitude and love, my generosity had apparently fostered a sense of entitlement that now viewed me as nothing more than a source of funding for their lifestyle. The realization hit me like cold water. The daughter I had raised with such love and devotion saw me not as a cherished family member, but as an obligation to be managed and a resource to be controlled. The travel agent's cheerful voice seemed to come from very far away as she explained the final booking details. Her enthusiasm about our family cruise felt surreal against the growing tension I sensed from Linda and Mark. Something had shifted in the air of that small office, though I couldn't yet identify what had changed or why my daughter's entire demeanor had transformed so dramatically. Linda's fingers drummed against the polished desk surface, a nervous habit I remembered from her childhood, when she was working up courage to ask for something she knew might be refused. Mark's attention had shifted from the cruise brochures to his phone, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen in what appeared to be an urgent text conversation. Their behavior felt secretive and exclusionary, in a way that made my chest tighten with anxiety. The agent turned toward me with the final paperwork, her smile warm and professional, as she prepared to process the payment that would secure our family vacation. I reached for my purse, my hands steady, despite the growing unease that seemed to fill the small space like an unwelcome presence. This cruise represented months of planning and anticipation, and I was determined not to let my imagination create problems where none exist. That's when Linda's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and dismissive, in a way that made my blood freeze in my veins. Her words felt like a physical blow, each syllable designed to diminish and exclude. The travel agent's expression shifted from professional pleasantness to confusion and discomfort as the true family dynamics became suddenly, painfully clear. The phrase that shattered my understanding of my place in my daughter's life contained no affection, no respect, no acknowledgement of the 71 years I had spent learning how to love and sacrifice for family. Instead, her words revealed a calculation so cold and mercenary that I felt my entire identity as a mother and grandmother crumble in real time. Mark's reaction told me everything I needed to know about his role in this devastating moment. His lack of surprise, his quick supportive gesture toward Linda, his immediate return to his phone, as if nothing significant had happened. All of it painted a picture of conspiracy and premeditation. The travel agent's attempts to mediate the situation only highlighted how completely I had been blindsided by my own family. Her suggestions about alternative cabin arrangements and her confused questions about our preferences revealed that she had assumed we were actually planning to travel together. My daughter's explanation of her position came delivered in the same tone she might use to discuss a problematic business proposal: clinical, efficient, final. No room for negotiation or compromise. No acknowledgement that the person she was so casually discarding had spent decades ensuring her happiness and success. No recognition that her words were destroying something precious and irreplaceable. The financial implications of her statement became clear as she outlined their expectations. They wanted the cruise, the luxury accommodations, the gourmet meals, the entertainment, the shore excursions, all funded by my savings and pension income. What they didn't want was my presence, my company, my participation in creating the memories that would supposedly justify this enormous expense. Mark's contribution to the conversation consisted of nodding agreement and occasionally glancing up from his phone to offer supporting comments that revealed the depth of their coordination. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or an unfortunate miscommunication. This was a carefully planned manipulation designed to extract maximum benefit while minimizing their obligations to include me in the experience I was financing. The travel agent's growing discomfort became almost palpable as she realized she was witnessing something deeply dysfunctional. Her professional training had prepared her to handle difficult customers, complex itineraries, and last-minute changes, but nothing had equipped her to navigate the emotional brutality unfolding in her office. My initial shock gave way to a strange sense of clarity that felt almost supernatural in its intensity. Sitting in that chair, listening to my daughter explain why my money was welcome, but my presence was not, I experienced a moment of recognition that changed everything I thought I knew about my life and relationships. The woman I had raised, educated, supported, and loved unconditionally had become someone capable of cruelty that took my breath away. The man she had married had encouraged and enabled this behavior, turning their partnership into a weapon designed to exploit my generosity while discarding my humanity. Together, they had created a dynamic that reduced me to nothing more than a funding source for their lifestyle preferences. But in that moment of devastating clarity, something else began to emerge. A strength I had forgotten I possessed. A sense of self-worth that had been buried under decades of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The grandmother who had been prepared to spend her life savings on a family vacation began to transform into a woman who remembered she deserved better treatment than this. My hand moved toward my purse, not to retrieve my credit card, as originally planned, but to put it away permanently. The cruise they wanted so desperately was about to become unavailable, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I finally understood I was worth more than their conditional, transactional version of family love. The credit card felt surprisingly heavy in my hand as I slid it back into my wallet with deliberate slowness. Linda's expression shifted from confident expectation to confusion, then to something approaching alarm, as she realized I wasn't proceeding with the payment as planned. Mark looked up from his phone, for the first time since his wife had delivered her devastating ultimatum, his face showing the first signs of genuine concern. The travel agent waited politely, clearly uncertain about how to proceed when the person funding an $8,000 vacation was no longer moving toward completion of the transaction. Her professional smile had become strained as she witnessed family dynamics that made her visibly uncomfortable. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second. What amazed me was how simple the word felt when it finally emerged from my mouth. Two letters that had somehow become foreign to my vocabulary over the decades of prioritizing everyone else's needs above my own. Two letters that felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had lost so gradually I hadn't noticed its absence until this moment of crystalline clarity. Linda's reaction was immediate and predictable. Her voice took on the patronizing tone she typically used when she believed I was being unreasonable or difficult. She began explaining, as if I were a confused child, why this vacation arrangement made perfect sense for everyone involved. The boys needed time with their parents without grandmother hovering. Mark needed to decompress from work stress. She needed quality time with her immediate family. Her justifications revealed the depth of her entitlement and the extent to which she had rewritten our family history to cast herself as the victim of my overwhelming presence. According to her narrative, I was too demanding, too emotional, too needy for a relaxing family vacation. The solution was obviously for me to pay for their enjoyment while staying home where I belonged. Mark's contribution to this conversation consisted primarily of supportive nods and occasional comments about how much the boys were looking forward to the cruise. His manipulation was more subtle than Linda's, but equally calculated. He spoke about family bonding and making memories, carefully avoiding any mention of who would be excluded from these precious experiences. The travel agent made several attempts to suggest compromises that might satisfy everyone's needs. Perhaps separate cabins on the same deck. Maybe I could join them for certain excursions while maintaining independent accommodations. Her suggestions were well-intentioned, but missed the fundamental issue. My daughter and her husband wanted my money, but not my company. As Linda's arguments became more insistent and Mark's support more vocal, I found myself experiencing a strange sense of detachment. These people were revealing themselves to be individuals I barely recognized, despite decades of shared history and what I had believed was mutual love and respect. The masks were falling away to expose motivations and attitudes that horrified me. My response to their increasingly desperate attempts at persuasion was to gather my purse, stand up from my chair, and prepare to leave. The action seemed to short-circuit their prepared arguments and revealed just how much they had counted on my compliance with their plan. Linda's voice became sharper, more demanding, as she realized her financial scheme was crumbling. The walk toward the agency door felt like moving through thick water, each step requiring enormous effort, but carrying me towards something I couldn't yet name. Behind me, Linda's voice rose with frustration and disbelief. She couldn't seem to comprehend that the mother who had never denied her anything was finally saying no to a request that crossed every line of basic respect and decency. Mark's final attempt at manipulation involved invoking the grandchildren, suggesting that my refusal to fund their cruise would disappoint Jason and Tyler. His words were carefully chosen to maximize guilt while minimizing his own responsibility for creating this situation. The implication was clear. Any disappointment the boys experienced would be my fault, not the natural consequence of their parents' greed and insensitivity. The travel agent's relief was visible as the toxic dynamic finally moved out of her office. Her polite goodbyes couldn't disguise her eagerness to return to customers who treated each other with basic human decency. I wondered how often she witnessed family dysfunction masquerading as vacation planning, how many elderly clients she had seen manipulated by relatives who viewed them as ATM machines rather than human beings. The parking lot outside the agency felt like neutral territory, a space where I could finally breathe without feeling suffocated by my daughter's expectations and demands. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, a reminder that the world continued to exist beyond the toxic bubble Linda and Mark had created around their vacation plan. My car keys felt solid and real in my hand, a tangible connection to my independence and autonomy. The simple act of unlocking my own vehicle and preparing to drive myself home represented freedoms I had taken for granted until this moment. No one was going to control my movements, my decisions, or my financial resources without my explicit consent. The drive home passed in a blur of recognition and revelation. Street signs and familiar landmarks looked the same, but everything felt different through the lens of what had just occurred. I was the same person who had driven to that travel agency filled with excitement about creating family memories, but I was also fundamentally changed by what I had learned about my daughter's true feelings toward me. The silence in my house felt different when I returned from the travel agency. Usually, the quiet of my empty rooms brought a sense of peace and reflection. But that afternoon, the silence seemed to echo with the reverberations of Linda's words. I moved through my familiar spaces, feeling like a stranger in my own home, as if the foundation of everything I had believed about my life had shifted beneath my feet. My answering machine was blinking with 3 messages when I checked it an hour later. All 3 were from Linda, her voice progressing from confusion to frustration to something approaching panic as she apparently realized I was serious about canceling their cruise. Her messages revealed a fundamental inability to comprehend that her mother might have limits, boundaries, or self-respect. The first message was dismissive, suggesting I was overreacting to what she characterized as a simple misunderstanding about travel arrangements. Her tone implied that I had somehow misinterpreted her clearly stated preference for my absence from the vacation I was funding. The condescension in her voice made my skin crawl with recognition of how long I had been accepting this treatment, without consciously acknowledging its toxicity. The second message showed growing concern as Linda began to realize the financial implications of my refusal. Her voice carried a note of desperation as she mentioned the deposits they had already made based on my promised contribution. She spoke about the boys' excitement and the time Mark had requested off from work, as if these factors should override my right to be treated with basic dignity. The third message revealed the extent of Linda's entitlement and her complete inability to understand my perspective. She actually seemed angry that I was being unreasonable about their vacation plans. Her words suggested that funding their cruise while staying home was simply my natural role as mother and grandmother, not a favor that deserved gratitude or respect. The phone rang again while I was listening to her messages, Linda's name appearing on the caller ID with insistent urgency. I stared at the ringing phone, feeling no obligation to answer and provide her with another opportunity to manipulate or berate me. The ringing stopped, started again 5 minutes later, and continued intermittently throughout the evening. Mark left his own message around dinner time, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable and conciliatory. He spoke about family relationships and the importance of not letting misunderstandings damage our bonds. His words were smooth and practiced, revealing skills he had clearly developed through years of corporate negotiations and customer relations. His message included subtle threats, disguised as concerns about my emotional state and my ability to make rational decisions at my age. He suggested that perhaps I wasn't thinking clearly, that stress and confusion were causing me to overreact to a simple family discussion. The gaslighting was so skillful, I might have fallen for it in the past. Before I learned to recognize these tactics, the evening news played in the background as I prepared a simple dinner for one. But my attention kept drifting to the phone calls I wasn't answering and the messages I wasn't returning. Each ring felt like an attempt to drag me back into the toxic dynamic I had finally recognized and rejected. Each unanswered call represented a small victory for my newfound autonomy. My neighbor Helen appeared at my kitchen window around 8 o'clock, her concerned expression visible through the glass as she gestured toward my front yard. I opened the door to find Linda's car parked in my driveway, though Linda herself was nowhere to be seen. Helen's worried voice carried across the space between our houses as she asked if everything was all right. Linda emerged from her car as Helen and I were talking, her stride purposeful and her expression determined, in a way that made my stomach clench with anticipation. She had clearly decided that in-person manipulation might be more effective than phone calls, and her body language suggested she was prepared for a confrontation. Helen's protective positioning near my front door revealed her instinctive understanding that something was seriously wrong. The conversation that followed took place on my front porch, in full view of several neighbors who were working in their yards or walking their dogs. Linda's voice remained carefully controlled, but her words carried a venom that made Helen step closer to my side. The public nature of our confrontation seemed to frustrate Linda, who was clearly accustomed to conducting these battles in private, where witnesses couldn't observe her behavior. Linda's arguments followed a predictable pattern, beginning with attempts to minimize what had happened at the travel agency, and progressing to increasingly desperate efforts to make me feel guilty for disappointing the family. She spoke about the boys' excitement, Mark's limited vacation time, and her own need for family bonding, as if these factors somehow obligated me to fund experiences that excluded me. Helen's presence seemed to serve as a reality check, her shocked expressions and occasional supportive comments revealing how abnormal Linda's expectations truly were. When Linda suggested that grandmothers naturally wanted to provide for their families without expecting inclusion, Helen's audible gasp of disbelief provided external validation for my growing understanding of the situation. The confrontation ended when Linda realized that public pressure and witness testimony were not working in her favor. Her final words, delivered with cold precision, revealed the depth of her entitlement and her complete inability to comprehend my perspective. She spoke about ingratitude and selfishness, projecting her own character flaws onto me with stunning psychological accuracy. Helen's arm around my shoulders, as Linda drove away, felt like an anchor to reality and decency. Her quiet words of support, and her obvious horror at what she had witnessed, provided confirmation that I wasn't overreacting or being unreasonable. Sometimes it takes an outside observer to help us see clearly what we've been trained to accept as normal. The morning after Linda's driveway confrontation brought unexpected peace. My house felt lighter somehow, as if a heavy presence had been lifted from the atmosphere. I found myself moving through my morning routine with more energy than I had felt in months, despite the emotional exhaustion of the previous day's revelations. Helen appeared at my back door around 9 o'clock, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about what she had witnessed. Her presence felt like a gift, a reminder that genuine care and concern didn't come with conditions or expectations. We sat at my kitchen table as she shared her observations about Linda's behavior and her amazement at my daughter's sense of entitlement. Her validation meant more than I could express. Helen had known my family for 15 years, had watched Linda's children grow up, had observed our relationships during countless neighborhood gatherings. Her perspective as an outside observer carried weight that my own emotional involvement had prevented me from achieving. She helped me understand that what I had experienced wasn't normal family dysfunction, but something far more concerning. Helen's own story provided context and comparison that helped me process my situation. She spoke about her relationship with her adult children, describing the mutual respect and consideration that characterized their interactions. Her examples of how her family planned vacations, managed finances, and made decisions revealed how far my relationship with Linda had strayed from healthy family dynamics. The conversation led to my first concrete step toward reclaiming my autonomy. Helen offered to accompany me to the bank, where I could speak with someone about protecting my finances from further manipulation. Her suggestion felt both practical and empowering, a way to transform my emotional awakening into concrete action that would safeguard my future independence. The bank visit revealed information that should have been obvious, but had been obscured by my trust and Linda's manipulation. The financial advisor, a professional woman about Linda's age, explained options for protecting assets and maintaining financial independence during aging. Her matter-of-fact discussion of elder financial abuse helped normalize my experience while providing practical solutions. Learning about power of attorney restrictions, account access limitations, and estate planning protections felt like acquiring armor against future attacks on my autonomy. The advisor's respectful treatment and assumption of my competence contrasted sharply with Linda's patronizing approach to my financial affairs. I left the bank feeling educated, empowered, and protected in ways I hadn't realized I needed. Helen's introduction to her book club that evening provided my first taste of community beyond family obligations. The group of 8 women, ranging in age from 65 to 82, welcomed me with warmth that felt genuine rather than dutiful. Their conversation was lively, intelligent, and completely focused on topics that had nothing to do with their children's needs or demands. Listening to these women discuss literature, politics, travel, and personal interests reminded me of who I used to be before I allowed my identity to become completely absorbed in my role as Linda's mother. Their stories about pursuing education, starting businesses, traveling independently, and maintaining friendships revealed possibilities I had forgotten existed for women my age. Margaret, the group's unofficial leader, shared her experience of setting boundaries with adult children who had assumed too much control over her life. Her story resonated powerfully with my recent experiences, but her outcome provided hope for transformation and recovery. She spoke about the peace that came from defining her own priorities and the respect she had eventually earned by demanding appropriate treatment. The book they were currently reading dealt with themes of late-life reinvention and the courage required to change course when existing paths no longer served one's well-being. The synchronicity felt almost mystical, as if the universe was providing exactly the guidance and support I needed at this crucial moment in my life. Their discussion sparked ideas about possibilities I hadn't considered in years. Dorothy, a retired teacher who reminded me of my former self, described her recent enrollment in art classes at the community college. Her enthusiasm for learning new skills and meeting new people provided a compelling model for how to fill time that had previously been consumed by family obligations. Her paintings, shared through photos on her phone, revealed talents that had been dormant for decades, but were now flourishing. The evening's conversation ranged from practical matters, like senior discounts and health insurance, to deeper questions about purpose, fulfillment, and legacy. These women had clearly grappled with many of the same questions I was just beginning to confront. Their wisdom, hard-earned through experience, felt like a roadmap for navigating the territory ahead. Caroline, a widow whose husband had died 8 years earlier, spoke about the unexpected joys of independence after decades of couplehood and motherhood. Her description of making decisions based solely on her own preferences, traveling to destinations that interested her, and spending time with people who valued her company, painted a picture of possibility that both excited and frightened me. The group's invitation to join them for their monthly lunch outing felt like an opening to a world I had forgotten existed. Their casual mention of upcoming activities, museum visits, day trips to nearby towns, volunteer opportunities at local charities, revealed a richness of experience that contrasted sharply with my recent focus on Linda's family's needs and demands. Walking home from the book club meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my own future. The women I had just met were living proof that life after 70 could be vibrant, purposeful, and joyful. Their examples provided models for aging that had nothing to do with becoming increasingly dependent on family members who might not have my best interests at heart. The community college catalog arrived in my mailbox 3 days after my first book club meeting, as if the universe was conspiring to support my transformation. I had called the previous morning to request information about their senior audit program, surprising myself with my boldness in taking such a concrete step toward expanding my world beyond family obligations. Flipping through the course offerings felt like opening a treasure chest of possibilities I had forgotten existed. Art classes, writing workshops, history seminars, computer training, foreign language instruction, all available to seniors at significantly reduced rates. My excitement grew as I imagined myself sitting in classrooms again, engaging with ideas and people who had nothing to do with my role as Linda's mother or the boys' grandmother. The photography class caught my attention first, perhaps because it represented something completely new rather than a return to previous interests. The course description promised instruction in both traditional and digital techniques, field trips to scenic locations, and a final exhibition of student work. The idea of creating something beautiful and personally meaningful felt revolutionary after years of focusing exclusively on other people's needs and preferences. My first real test of independence came when Linda called that afternoon, her voice carrying the brittle cheerfulness she typically used when attempting to manipulate me back into compliance. She spoke about family dinner on Sunday, assuming my attendance despite our recent confrontation. Her casual tone suggested she expected our relationship to return to its previous dynamic without any acknowledgement of what had transpired. The conversation revealed Linda's complete inability to comprehend that our relationship had fundamentally changed. She mentioned Mark's concern about my behavior and suggested that perhaps I needed to speak with someone about my emotional state. Her attempt to pathologize my newfound assertiveness was so transparent that I almost laughed at the audacity of her manipulation attempt. My response surprised us both with its clarity and firmness. I explained that family dinners would need to be rescheduled around my new commitments, that my time was no longer automatically available for their convenience. The silence that followed my statement stretched long enough to reveal Linda's shock at encountering boundaries she had never experienced from me before. Her arguments followed predictable patterns, beginning with guilt about disappointing the boys and progressing to concerns about my social isolation and mental health. She seemed genuinely unable to comprehend that I might have interests and relationships outside of our family circle. Her worldview apparently couldn't accommodate the possibility that her mother might be a complete person with independent needs and desires. The phone call ended when I simply announced that I had other plans and hung up before Linda could respond. The action felt both terrifying and exhilarating, a concrete demonstration of my right to control my own time and attention. The silence that followed felt different from the uncomfortable quiet after our travel agency confrontation. This silence felt like freedom. Margaret from the book club called that evening to check on how I was adjusting to our group's reading selection and to mention an upcoming museum exhibition she thought might interest me. Her casual invitation to attend the opening reception together felt like validation that I was worthy of friendship based on shared interests rather than family obligation. The museum visit provided my first experience of socializing in a context completely removed from my identity as Linda's mother. Margaret introduced me to several other women from various community groups, each of whom seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as an individual. Their questions focused on my thoughts about the artwork, my background and interests, and my perspectives on topics we were discussing. Standing in that gallery, engaged in conversation with intelligent women who valued my opinions, I felt myself remembering who I used to be before I allowed my identity to become completely absorbed in family roles. The woman who had once taught high school English, who had read voraciously and thought deeply about literature and life, began to emerge from decades of dormancy. The art exhibit featured works by local artists, over 60, many of whom had begun their artistic careers later in life. Their stories, shared through brief biographical statements next to their pieces, provided inspiring examples of creativity and growth, continuing well into advanced age. Several artists had started painting or sculpting only after retirement, discovering talents they never knew they possessed. One painter's statement particularly resonated with my current situation. She described how caring for elderly parents and then raising grandchildren had consumed her middle years, leaving little time for personal interests or creative expression. Only after establishing firm boundaries with family members had she been able to reclaim time and energy for her own development and fulfillment. Margaret's easy companionship and genuine interest in my responses to the artwork felt like a preview of friendships that could develop when people chose to spend time together rather than being obligated by blood relationships. Her questions about my thoughts and reactions assumed intelligence and depth that Linda had long since stopped acknowledging in me. The evening concluded with dinner at a small restaurant near the museum, where Margaret shared stories about her own journey toward independence after her husband's death. Her description of the guilt and family pressure she had faced when she stopped providing unlimited babysitting and financial support for her adult children provided a roadmap for the resistance I might encounter. Her advice was practical and encouraging. Establish boundaries, gradually but firmly. Expect pushback from family members accustomed to unlimited access. Seek support from people who understand and respect your right to self-determination. And most importantly, remember that you are not responsible for other adults' emotions or financial decisions. Driving home from that evening, I felt more optimistic about my future than I had in years. The woman I had spent time with that day saw me as interesting, intelligent, and worthy of friendship. Her respect and consideration provided a stark contrast to Linda's treatment and helped me understand just how much I had been settling for in my family relationships. Linda's retaliation for my newfound independence began subtly, as these campaigns often do. The boys suddenly became unavailable for our usual Saturday afternoon visits, their schedules mysteriously filled with activities that hadn't existed the previous week. When I called to check on them, Linda's explanations were vague and dismissive, suggesting that teenagers naturally outgrow relationships with grandparents. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and clearly calculated to make me question my recent decisions. Linda spoke about the boys' confusion regarding my changed behavior and their hurt feelings about my apparent rejection of the family. Her words were carefully chosen to imply that my boundary setting was causing emotional damage to innocent children who couldn't understand why grandmother had become difficult. Mark's contribution to this campaign involved concerned phone calls about my well-being and social isolation. He spoke about elderly people who became withdrawn and suspicious, losing touch with reality and family connections. His amateur psychological analysis was obviously designed to make me doubt my perceptions and return to my previous compliant role in their family dynamic. The financial pressure came next, delivered through Linda's increasingly frequent mentions of their economic struggles and the impact my selfishness was having on their plans. She spoke about having to disappoint the boys because grandmother was no longer willing to help with expenses. Her implication was clear. Any unhappiness in their family was my fault for withdrawing my financial support. Helen's observations from next door provided crucial reality checks during this period. She noticed the pattern of Linda's visits, the raised voices during phone conversations, and my visible stress following each interaction. Her outside perspective helped me recognize the manipulation tactics that might have been invisible to someone experiencing them from the inside. The book club became my lifeline during this difficult period, providing regular contact with women who reinforced my right to set boundaries and pursue personal interests. Margaret's experience with similar family dynamics provided specific strategies for maintaining independence while dealing with guilt and pressure. Her suggestions were practical and tested through her own successful navigation of comparable challenges. Dorothy shared articles about elder financial abuse and family manipulation, educational materials that helped me understand the broader context of my situation. Learning that my experience was common rather than unique reduced the shame and self-doubt that Linda's campaign was designed to create.